I didn't fight back when they humiliated me. I didn't scream when my brother smirked across the Thanksgiving table, and I didn't sue when my parents signed away the only thing I'd ever worked for. I just sat there, folded my napkin, and let them think they had won. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew that when you gave a spoiled child everything he wanted, you weren't blessing him. You're cursing him. But before the silence, before the cold revenge, you have to understand why it hurts so much. You have to understand the house. To understand the house, you have to understand the Millers. I was born into a role I never auditioned for. The insurance policy. My older brother, Caleb, he was the investment. It's a subtle difference, but it shapes your entire universe. When the investment crashes his car, you panic and fix it because he's the prize. When the insurance policy gets a flat tire, you tell her to figure it out because she's capable. I heard that word my whole life. Capable. Sarah doesn't need help with her homework, she's capable. Sarah doesn't need us to co-sign her lease, she's capable. Sarah understands why we can't make it to her graduation, she's capable of handling it. I wore that word like a badge of honor, not realizing it was actually a collar. By 25, I was working as a project manager for a commercial construction firm in Columbus, Ohio. I was good at logistics. I was good at making impossible deadlines happen. I lived in a shoebox apartment, ate ramen 3 nights a week, and saved 50% of my paycheck. I was building a life of bricks and mortar, solid and unshakable. Caleb built a life of smoke. At 28, he was finding himself. That year, finding himself involved a failed DJ career in Miami, a considerable amount of debt that my father quietly paid off, and a return to Ohio to sleep in my parents' basement. Then came the phone call about the lake house. It wasn't really a house anymore. It was a rotting memory on 3 acres of prime waterfront property about an hour north of the city. It had belonged to my grandfather. When I was a kid, it was magical. Screened-in porches, the smell of cedar and lake water, fireflies in jars. But Grandpa had died 10 years ago, and my parents had let it sit. Nature is cruel to things left alone. "We're going to sell it," my dad told me over lunch at a diner. He looked tired. He was 62 then, still working at the plant, but his knees were shot. "The taxes are eating us alive, Sarah. And the county sent a notice about the septic system. It's a hazard." My heart dropped. "You can't sell it, that's our history." "It's a money pit," Mom said, picking at her salad. She looked at me with that specific look she saved for when she wanted something, a mix of vulnerability and expectation. "Unless what?" I asked. "Unless someone in the family took it on," Dad said. He leaned forward. "We're too old for a renovation project." Caleb is in transition. "But you, Sarah, you know construction, you know contractors." "I don't have the money to buy it from you," I said. "We don't want you to buy it," Mom said softly. "We want to keep it in the family. Here's the deal. If you pay for the materials and manage the renovation, bring it up to code, make it livable again, we will transfer the deed to you. It will be your inheritance, given early." I put my sandwich down. "You'd give me the house." "It's evaluated at land value only right now," Dad explained. "The house is a teardown on paper, but if you save it, it's yours. We just want to be able to visit in the summers. That's all we ask." I looked at them. I saw 2 aging parents who were overwhelmed. I didn't see the trap. I saw an opportunity to finally own something real, something beautiful. And if I'm being honest, I saw a chance to finally be the favorite, to be the savior. "Okay," I said, "I'll do it." I didn't just do it. I gave that house my blood. The first weekend I drove up there, the reality set in. The driveway was overgrown with brambles that scratched the paint of my Honda. The front porch sagged a good 6 inches to the left. When I unlocked the front door, the smell of mildew and rodent droppings hit me like a physical wall. Most people would have walked away. I walked in. I walked through the dark, cluttered rooms. I saw past the peeling wallpaper and the water-stained ceilings. I saw the bones. Hand-hewn beams from the 1940s. A stone fireplace that anchors the room. A view of the lake that costs $1 million hidden behind dirty glass. I can fix this, I think. I can make this perfect. The next 3 years of my life followed a brutal rhythm. Monday through Friday, I worked my corporate job, managing million-dollar budgets for clients. Friday night, I drove up to the lake, sleeping on a cot in the only room with a working space heater. Saturday and Sunday, I worked until my muscles screamed. I drained my savings account. The first $10,000 went to the roof. The old shingles were moss-covered sponges. I couldn't afford a full crew, so I hired 2 guys from a local temp agency and went up there with them. I spent 3 days in July scraping tar off my arms. I learned how to flash a chimney. I learned that roofing is the hardest work on earth. When I told my parents the roof was done, they said, "That's great, honey. Caleb says the Wi-Fi at the basement is spotty. Can you look at that when you visit?" I swallowed the irritation. Focus on the goal, I told myself. The deer, the house. The second year was the interior. The wiring was a fire hazard, knob and tube from the 50s. I spent $12,000 on a complete rewire. I didn't buy new clothes that year. I didn't go on vacation. My friends went to Cabo for a bachelorette party. I stayed at the lake and learned how to hang drywall. "You're missing out," my best friend Jen told me on the phone. "You're 27, Sarah. You're spending your prime years covered in drywall dust." "It's an investment," I told her, coughing as I sanded a seam. "I'm building equity. When this is done, I'll have a waterfront property with no mortgage. Who's the smart one then?" "Is your name on the deed yet?" she asked. I paused. "Not yet. Dad said we should wait until the certificate of occupancy is reissued so we don't get hit with higher transfer taxes." "Get it in writing, Sarah. It's my parents, Jen. They aren't going to screw me." I believe that. I really did. By the 3rd summer, the money was getting tight. I had spent nearly $55,000. I had refinished the hardwood floors myself, renting a heavy drum sander that nearly relocated my shoulders. I had installed the kitchen cabinets, white shaker style, with butcher block countertops I had oiled by hand. It has become beautiful. The light poured in through the new windows. The smell of rot was gone, replaced by the scent of fresh paint and lavender. That was the summer Caleb decided to show an interest. He drove up on a Saturday in a leased BMW. He had a new girlfriend, Jessica. Jessica was a Pilates instructor with a vocal fry and a gaze that assessed the cost of everything she looked at. "Whoa," Caleb said, stepping onto the new wraparound porch. "You really cleaned this dump up." I was covered in grout. I was tiling the backsplash in the kitchen. "Hi, Caleb, nice to see you." He walked in, not taking his shoes off, tracking mud onto the floors I had just sealed. Jessica followed, looking around with a critical eye. "It's cute," she said. "A little rustic, but cute." "Where's the beer?" Caleb asked, opening the new stainless steel refrigerator I had bought on a Black Friday sale. "I didn't buy beer, I'm working," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "Geez, Sarah, you're always so uptight." He shut the fridge door a little too hard. "So, when's this place fully ready? Mom said you're almost done." "A few more months," I said. "I need to finish the guest bathroom and the landscaping." "Cool, cool," he wandered into the living room. "The view is killer. I was thinking maybe for my birthday in August I could bring some guys up here, have a little boat party." I feel a knot of protectiveness in my chest. This wasn't a party house. This was my sanctuary. I had bled for these floors. "I don't know, Caleb. It's not really set up for parties yet, and the septic is new. I don't want 20 people overloading it." He rolled his eyes at Jessica. "See, she acts like she's the landlord." "I am the landlord," I said, my voice sharp. "Or I will be." Caleb laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. "Right, the queen of the lake, whatever. We're gonna go grab lunch in town. You want anything? A hammer, some nails." They left. I stood in the silence of the kitchen, looking at the intricate herringbone pattern I was laying out with the tile. My back ached. My hands were rough like sandpaper. I had a bad feeling then. A small, cold prickle at the base of my neck, but I pushed it down. I pushed it down because the alternative, that my brother looked at my work and saw only what he could take, was too painful to acknowledge. I finished the house in November. It was perfect. I had staged it with thrift store finds I had restored. It looked like a page out of a magazine. I invited my parents up for the final reveal. I cooked a roast chicken. I lit a fire in the stone fireplace. The house was warm, golden, and welcoming. Mom and Dad walked in, and I saw the shock on their faces. They remembered the rot. They remembered the smell. Now they were standing in a dream home. "Oh my goodness," Mom whispered, touching the walls. "Sarah, you did this." "I did," I said, beaming. I felt, for the first time in years, that I had finally earned it. I had finally proven my worth. Dad walked around, checking the fixtures, stomping on the floorboards to test their solidity. He looked impressed, but he also looked calculating. It's worth a lot of money now, Dad said, staring out the window at the gray November lake. The appraisal came in at $450,000, I said proudly. You guys were sitting on a gold mine. 450, Dad repeated. He looked at Mom. A silent communication passed between them. A look I didn't understand then, but I understand perfectly now. It was the look of greed masquerading as necessity. So, I said, pulling out a folder from my bag, I have the paperwork for the deed transfer ready. I just need you guys to sign, and we can file it next week. The air in the room changed. The warmth from the fire seemed to vanish. Sarah, honey, Mom said, turning to me with a tight smile. Let's not talk about paperwork tonight. Let's just enjoy the dinner. You worked so hard. But the deal, there's plenty of time for deals, Dad said, clapping his hands together. Let's eat, I'm starving. I put the folder away. I told myself I was being paranoid. They were just tired. They were just overwhelmed by the transformation. I served them dinner. We laughed. We drank wine. I went to bed that night in the master bedroom, the room I had framed, insulated, and painted, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. I didn't know that it was the last night I would ever sleep in that house as if it were my own. The phone call came 2 weeks later. Sarah, Mom said, her voice was high-pitchy, we need to have a family dinner, this Sunday, at the lake house. Okay, I said, sitting at my desk at work. I'll bring dessert. Caleb is coming too, she added, and Jessica. Okay. And Sarah, please don't bring up the paperwork. Not yet, we have some news to share first. I hung up the phone. I stared at my computer screen, the numbers blurring. The knot in my chest was back, and this time it was tightening like a noose. I knew, deep down I knew, but I drove up there anyway. I drove toward the betrayal with the windows down, letting the cold air hit my face, hoping I was wrong. I wasn't wrong. The Sunday of the dinner, the sky was the color of a bruised plum. A late November storm was rolling off the lake, stripping the last of the dead leaves from the trees. I parked my car next to Caleb's BMW. He had parked diagonally, taking up 2 spots, forcing me to park my tires in the mud. It was a small thing, but it was a declaration. I am here. I take up space. You adjust around me. I walked up the steps I had sanded. I touched the rail I had stained. It felt cold under my hand. When I opened the door, the heat hit me, too high, stifling. The fireplace was roaring. Caleb was already there, sitting in the armchair I had reupholstered, his feet up on the coffee table. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Jessica was perched on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. Hey, sis, Caleb said, not getting up. He raised a glass of red wine. This vintage Dad opened is actually decent. I looked at the bottle. It was a 2014 Cabernet I had bought and saved for a special occasion. I had hidden it in the back of the pantry. They had found it. Hi, Caleb, I said, taking off my coat. Where are Mom and Dad? Kitchen, he said. Mom's stressing over the gravy. You know how she gets. I walked into the kitchen, the room I had built. The white cabinets were gleaming, but the counter was a mess of peels and spilled flour. Mom was stirring a pot, her shoulders tight up to her ears. Dad was leaning against the island, staring at his drink. When I walked in, the conversation died instantly. Sarah, Mom turned, her smile too bright, too frantic. You made it. The weather looks frightful. It's fine, I said. I looked at Dad. Hey, Dad. Hi, honey, he mumbled into his glass. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My stomach turned over. I knew that looked. That was the look he had when he forgot to pick me up from soccer practice because Caleb had a scraped knee. That was the look of guilt that had already justified itself. Can I help? I asked. No, Mom ushered me out. Go sit, relax, you work too hard. We moved to the dining room. I sat in my usual spot. Caleb sat at the head of the table, Dad's usual spot. Dad didn't correct him. He just took the chair to the side. Dinner was a blur of fork noises and rain lashing against the windows. Caleb talked about his investments, cryptocurrency, NFTs, things that sounded like gambling with extra steps. Jessica talked about a retreat she wanted to host in Costa Rica. I ate the roast chicken I hadn't cooked. It was dry. Finally, the plates were cleared. The storm outside was howling now, rattling the new double-paned windows I had installed to keep us safe. Mom cleared her throat. She put her hand on Dad's arm, squeezing it. So, she began, her voice trembling slightly, we have some wonderful news. She looked at Caleb. Caleb smirked, leaning back, expanding his chest. Jess and I are pregnant, he announced. The air left the room. Oh, I said, the instinct to be polite kicked in. Wow, congratulations, that's a big step. We're pretty stoked, Caleb said. It's a boy. Carrying on the family name and all that. A grandson, Dad said, finally looking up. His eyes were wet. A Miller grandson. That's amazing, I said, and I meant it. I loved babies. I'm happy for you. Well, Mom said, because of the baby. Things have to change. Caleb and Jessica, they're currently in that one-bedroom apartment downtown. It's 4th floor, no elevator. It's not suitable for a child. I stopped breathing. I put my hands in my lap to stop them from shaking. Okay, I said. We've been talking, Dad took over, his voice gruff, trying to sound authoritative to cover the shame. About the lake house. The deal, I whispered. We have a deal. Sarah, listen, Mom interrupted, leaning forward. You're single, you live in the city, you have a fantastic career. You're established. I spent $60,000, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Very calm, very far away. We know, Mom waved her hand dismissively. And we appreciate the work you did. It's beautiful, but Caleb, he needs a home, he needs stability to raise this child. We can't let our grandson grow up in a rental. So you're selling it to him? I asked. Caleb laughed, a short, sharp bark. With what credit, Sarah? I'm an entrepreneur. Banks don't get my vision. We're gifting the house to Caleb, Dad said. He said it was fast, like ripping off a bandage. We signed the deed over yesterday. It's done. The silence that followed was louder than the thunder outside. I looked at the quartz countertops. I remember the weight of them. I remember the bruises on my hips from carrying the drywall. I remember the nights I slept in the cold, dreaming of the day this place would be mine. You gave him the house, I repeated. My house. It wasn't your house, Sarah, Caleb snapped. It was Mom and Dad's house, and now it's mine. I paid for the roof, I said, looking at Dad. I paid for the floors. I paid for the wiring in the walls. And you lived here rent-free for weekends. Mom argued, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. You treated it like your personal vacation home for 3 years. That has value, Sarah. Call it a wash. A wash? I stared at her. I was working. I wasn't vacationing. I was laboring. You're being selfish, Jessica chimed in. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice was bored, superior. It's for a baby. You'd really take a home away from a child. I'm not taking anything, I said. I earned this. You don't need it. Dad slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. Look at you. You have a 401k. You have a new car. Caleb has nothing. Why can't you just help your brother? Why do you always have to keep score? Why do you always have to keep score? That was the sentence that broke me. They didn't see me. They never had. To them, I was a machine that printed stability. If I was hurt, it didn't matter because I could fix myself. Caleb got a glass vase. If he fell, he shattered. So they wrapped him in cotton wool that they stripped from my back. I looked at Caleb. He wasn't even looking at me. He was pouring more of my wine into his glass, a look of utter satisfaction on his face. He had won. He hadn't lifted a finger. He hadn't sanded a single board, and he had won. I stood up. Sit down, Sarah, Dad commanded. We're not done discussing this. We need to figure out when you can get your furniture out of the guest cottage. Yeah, Caleb added, swirling his wine. Jess wants to turn that into a yoga studio. We need your junk out by the 1st. I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw the fear in my mother's eyes, fear that I would cause a scene, fear that I would ruin the fantasy that they were good parents. I saw the defiance in my father's jaw. I saw the entitlement in my brother's smirk. I could have screamed. I could have flipped the table. I could have listed every dollar, every hour, every drop of sweat. I could have told them they were thieves and liars. But I knew, with a sudden, crystal clarity, that it wouldn't matter. They had already written the story in their heads. In their story, I was the villainous, greedy sister, and they were the noble protectors of the family legacy. If I screamed, I just proved them right. So I did the one thing they didn't expect. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the ghost of a smile. Okay, I said. The word hung in the air. Okay, Mom blinked. You're right, I said softly. Caleb needs it more than I do. Relief washed over the table. It was palpable. Shoulders dropped. Dad exhaled a long breath. Thank you, honey, Mom said, tears springing to her eyes again. I knew you'd understand. I knew you'd do the right thing. You're a good sister, Sarah, Dad said, nodding. You're a good girl. When can you get your stuff? Caleb asked. I'll send movers, I said. I won't bother you. Great, Caleb said. Hey, leave the washer and dryer, yeah. Ours are in storage and they suck. I bought that washer and dryer 6 months ago, top of the line. Sure, Caleb, I said. Keep them, a housewarming gift. I walked to the hallway. I put on my coat. I didn't look back at the living room. I didn't look at the fireplace. Where are you going? Mom called out. We have pie. I'm tired, I said. I'm going to head back to the city. Drive safe, Dad called out, cheerful now. Call us when you get home. I walked out into the rain. The wind almost ripped the door from my hand. I closed it gently. I walked to my car, my boots sinking into the mud Caleb had forced me into. I sat in the driver's seat. I was soaked. I was shivering. I didn't start the car immediately. I sat there in the dark, watching the warm, golden glow of the windows. I saw their silhouettes moving inside. They were toasting. They were laughing. They were celebrating the heist. I didn't cry. I think I was in shock. I felt like I had been hollowed out with a spoon. I started the engine. I backed out of the driveway. I drove down the long, winding road that led away from the lake. I stopped at the edge of the property line. I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. Enjoy it, I thought. Enjoy the roof that doesn't leak. Enjoy the floors that don't squeak. Enjoy the warmth. Because I knew something about Caleb that my parents refused to see. Caleb was a consumer. He consumed money, he consumed patience, and he consumed things. He didn't know how to maintain. He only knew how to use. They had given a masterpiece to a toddler. I drove 3 hours back to the city in silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the rhythmic thump-thump of the windshield wipers. By the time I unlocked the door to my apartment, the shock had faded, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I went to my contacts. Mom, Dad, Caleb, I didn't block them. Blocking is a reaction. Blocking shows you care. Instead, I went to my settings. I turned off read receipts. I silenced notifications for their conversation thread. Then, I opened my banking app. I canceled the recurring transfer for the Family Emergency Fund I had been contributing to for 5 years. I opened my email and canceled the family Netflix account, the Spotify family plan, and the Amazon Prime login they all used. I didn't send a manifesto, I didn't send a bill, I just went dark. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A text from Mom, "Morning, honey. Thanks again for being so reasonable last night. Love you." I looked at it. I swiped it away. 2 hours later, text from Caleb. "Hey, the Netflix isn't working. Did you change the password?" I swiped it away. I went to work. I poured a coffee. The first rule of silence is that it's loud. When you scream at someone, they can tune you out. They can label you hysterical or emotional and move on. But when you simply vanish, when you become a black hole where a person used to be, that haunts them. For the first 6 months, my phone was a slot machine of desperate notifications. Mom, Sarah, are you coming for Easter? It won't be the same without you. Dad, I need help figuring out the new insurance policy for the car. Call me. Caleb, seriously? You cut the Spotify? Petty much? I didn't block them. I wanted to see the desperation. It was my morning news. I would sip my coffee, scroll through the guilt trips and the anger, and feel absolutely nothing. It was like watching a reality show about people I used to know. I replied only when necessary, and only with the efficiency of a chatbot. No. Busy, can't. I didn't tell them I had been promoted. I didn't tell them I had doubled my salary. I didn't tell them that I was dating a kind, quiet architect named Mark who actually asked me how my day was. I became a ghost. And while I was haunting them with my absence, I was rebuilding myself. I moved to Chicago. I traded the rural drives of Ohio for the steel and glass of the Windy City. I bought a condo on the 30th floor. It was stark, modern, and cold. Concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, zero clutter. It was the anti-lake house. There was no wood to rot. There was no siding to peel. There was just me and the skyline, but even ghosts have eyes. I keep tabs on them. I had a cousin, Emily, the only other person in the family who saw Caleb for what he was. We met for drinks whenever she was in the city. She was my spy. Year party. It's bad, Sarah, Emily told me, swirling her martini. Jessica left him. I felt a pang of sympathy, not for Caleb, but for the baby. Where's Leo? She took him, moved back to her parents in Arizona. Apparently, the rustic charm of the lake house wore off when the heating bill came in. Caleb cranked the heat all winter because he didn't want to chop wood for the stove. The bill was $3,000. Did he pay it? Mom and Dad paid it, Emily said, giving me a look. They said it was a housewarming gift. I nodded, looking out at the city lights. They're enabling the bleeding. Caleb bought a new truck, she added. A Raptor, lifted, 80 grand easy. How? He doesn't have a job. Home equity line of credit, Emily whispered. The house appraised high thanks to you. The bank gave him a massive line of credit based on the equity. He's treating the house like an ATM. I closed my eyes. I had built that equity with my sweat. I had sanded those floors to create value. And now Caleb was eating the walls. He was literally spending the roof I had installed. Let him, I said. Year 4. My career was skyrocketing. I was director of operations now. I wore tailored suits and commanded rooms full of men twice my age. I was ruthless, efficient, and entirely self-sufficient. But the hollow spot inside me, the place where my family used to be, never quite filled up. It just called over. I went home for Christmas that year, not to the lake house, never there. I went to an Airbnb town, met them for a 2-hour lunch at a neutral restaurant, and refused to go back to their place. They looked older, rapidly older. Dad's hands shook. Mom's hair was thinning. They looked like people who were holding up a collapsing ceiling. Caleb was there. He looked terrible. Bloated, red-faced, wearing expensive clothes that were stained. So, Caleb said, chewing with his mouth open. Heard you're a big shot now. Director. It's a job, I said. Must be nice, he sneezed. Sitting in an office while some of us are out here grinding, trying to build a business. How is the business? I asked politely. The microbrewery is coming along, he said. I'm converting the garage. It's gonna be huge. Lake House Lager, get it. The garage isn't insulated for fermentation, I said automatically. The temperature fluctuations will kill the yeast. Caleb slammed his fork down. Always the expert, huh? You think you know everything just because you hung some drywall? I hired a guy, a consultant. A consultant, I repeated. Yeah. He says it's fine. Who's paying the consultant? Drop it, Sarah, Dad asserted. He looked gray. Let your brother have his dream. I looked at Dad. I'm not stopping him, I'm just asking a question. You judge, Mom said, her voice trembling. You sit there in your fancy suit and you judge us. You don't know how hard it is. I know exactly how hard it is, I said. That's why I worked, so it wouldn't be hard. I paid the bill for lunch. It was $200. I didn't even look at the receipt. They watched me sign it with a mix of hunger and resentment. Year 5. The crash started in slow motion, then all at once. Emily called me on a Tuesday night. The garage burned down, she said. I sat up in bed. What? The microbrewery? Caleb tried to rig up some industrial heaters to keep the yeast warm, overloaded the circuit, the wiring. Sarah, did you rewire the garage when you did the house? No, I said, my blood runs cold. I told them the garage needed a separate panel. I told them not to run heavy loads on it. It was still the original 1950s wiring. Well, it caught fire. The garage is gone. The vintage Mustang Dad had stored in there. Gone. Was anyone hurt? No, Caleb was passed out in the main house. But Sarah, the insurance won't pay. Why not? Because Caleb was running an unlicensed commercial business on a residential property, and he had done unpermitted electrical work. The claim was denied. I stared at my bedroom wall, and Emily hesitated. The fire damaged the siding on the main house. The siding you put up, it's melted all along the west wall. It's vinyl, I whispered. Of course it melted. They're broke, Sarah. Mom and Dad co-signed the loan for the brewery equipment. The bank is calling in the debt. They're talking about a second mortgage on their house to cover it. They can't, I said. They're retired. They can't afford a mortgage payment. They don't have a choice. Caleb is crying, saying he'll go to jail for the business debts. You know, Mom, she won't let her baby go to jail. I hung up the phone. I walked to my window. I looked down at the city of Chicago, a grid of lights and order. I thought about the garage. I thought about the car Dad loved more than he loved his own retirement. I thought about the melted siding hanging off the house like dead skin. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I wasn't crying for them. I was crying for the house. My masterpiece, being dismembered piece by the very person they said deserved it. I didn't call them. I waited. Year 7. The waiting ended with a letter. It wasn't a text. It wasn't a voicemail. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope with a lawyer's return address. I opened it with a letter opener. Inside was a formal invitation, but not to a wedding or a gala. The Miller family requests your presence for a reconciliation dinner. Date, October 14th. Location, the lake house. Below the invitation was a handwritten note from my mother. The handwriting was shaky. "Sarah, please, we need you. We are drowning. Please come home." I logged onto the county auditor's website. I did what I should have done years ago. I pulled the public records for the lake house. It was a horror show. Lien, contractor unpaid. Link, state tax warrant. Notice of default, pre-foreclosure. The house was scheduled to be auctioned in 6 weeks. They weren't inviting me for dinner. They were inviting my checkbook. They had finally run out of runway. The investment had crashed, and now they were looking for the insurance policy. I looked at the date. I had a trip to London planned for work the week after that. A permanent transfer. I was leaving the country. I could just leave. I could throw the letter in the trash, get on the plane, and never look back. But there was one thing left to do. I needed to see it. I needed to see the ghost. I needed to stand in the wreckage of their choices and look them in the eyes. I RSVP'd, yes. I packed a bag. I rented a car, a modest sedan, nothing flashy. I didn't want to look rich. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, the one who survived. I drove back to Ohio. The leaves were turning, just like they were 7 years ago. The air was crisp. When I pulled up the driveway, my breath hitched. The brambles were back. The landscaping I had planted, the hydrangeas, the hostas, was dead, choked out by weeds. The garage was a charred skeleton, the blackened beams still standing like broken ribs. And the house, the paint was peeling. The gutters were hanging loose on one side, filled with debris. The porch, the beautiful wraparound porch, was cluttered with garbage bags, old gym equipment, and a rusted keg. It looked like a meth lab. I stepped out of the car. The silence of the lake was gone, replaced by the sound of a shutter banging in the wind. The front door opened. Mom stood there. She looked 80. She was wearing a sweater that had holes in the sleeves. "Sarah," she sobbed. She ran down the steps and hugged me. She smelled like stale cigarettes and fear. "You came," she cried into my shoulder. "Thank God you came." I stood stiffly, my arms at my sides. I didn't hug her back. "Hello, Mom," I said. I looked over her shoulder. Into the dark, cluttered hallway of the house I had built. It was time to end this. Walking into that house was like walking into a crime scene where the victim was my own past. Mom led me through the hallway. The beautiful oak floors I had laid were scuffed and gouged, hidden beneath dirty rugs. The smell was thicker inside, a pungent mix of stale beer, dog odor, though I saw no dog, and the unmistakable, musty scent of mildew. Dad was sitting at the dining table. The same table where they had disinherited me 7 years ago. He looked skeletal. His skin was gray, and he hadn't shaved in days. "Sarah," he croaked, not standing up. "You look good. City life agrees with you." "Dad," I nodded. Then Caleb walked in from the kitchen. If I hadn't known him, I wouldn't have recognized him. He had gained at least 50 pounds. His face was puffy, his eyes narrow and bloodshot. He was wearing sweatpants and a faded t-shirt with a bleach stain on the stomach. He looked 45, not 35. He stopped when he saw me. His eyes raked over my tailored wool coat, my leather boots, my calm face. The resentment radiated off him like heat waves. "Well," Caleb sneered, "the prodigal sister returns. Come to gloat." "Caleb," Mom snapped, her voice brittle. "Be nice. Sarah is a guest." "She's not a guest, she's family," Dad mumbled. "Sit down, Sarah." Mom made lasagna. We sat. The table was set with paper plates and plastic forks. The lasagna was frozen stufers, burnt around the edges, served in its aluminum tray. I remembered the roast chicken I had cooked for the reveal. I remembered the linen napkins and the candlelight. We ate in excruciating silence. The only sounds were the scraping of plastic forks and the wind battering the loose gutter outside. Bang, bang, bang. "So," Dad started, clearing his throat, pushing his half-eaten food away. "How is work? We hear you're doing very well." "Work is busy," I said. "Profitable." Caleb snorted into his water glass. We're going through a bit of a rough patch," Mom said, wringing her hands together. Her knuckles were white. "The economy, you know, it's been hard on small businesses." I looked at Caleb. "The brewery. The fire set me back," Caleb said defensively. "And the insurance company screwed me. It's temporary. I just need capital to restart." "And your retirement?" I asked, looking at Dad. Dad flinched. We had to dip into it. to help Caleb with legal fees after the fire. And the divorce, Jessica, that woman is a vulture. They're going to take the house, Sarah, Mom whispered, the tears finally spilling over. The bank, they sent the notice. November 1st. If we don't pay the arrears, they're putting it up for auction. November 1st, 2 weeks away. That's unfortunate, I said, taking a sip of water. The water tasted metallic. They hadn't changed the filters I installed. Unfortunate? Caleb slammed his hand on the table. The plastic cutlery jumped. It's a disaster. This is our legacy. Dad's father built the original cabin on this land. And I rebuilt it, I said quietly. And you destroyed it. I didn't destroy it, Caleb shouted. It was bad luck, the market turned. The contractors cheated me. Stop it, I said. I didn't shout. I just dropped my voice an octave into the register I used when firing incompetent subcontractors. The table went silent. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila folder. I opened it and spread the papers across the table, right over the lasagna tray. Notice of default, I read the headlines. $75,000 in mortgage arrears, $40,000 in unpaid property taxes. Mechanics liens from 3 different contractors totaling another $30,000. And a judgment against Dad for the unpaid small business loan of $150,000. They stared at the papers. They looked like deer caught in headlights. You checked up on us? Dad whispered, horrified. I did due diligence, I said, before I attended a business meeting. This isn't business, Sarah. This is family. Mom cried. It stopped being family the night you stole $60,000 of my equity and gave it to him as a reward for mediocrity, I said. Caleb looked like he was going to lunge across the table. You smug bitch. You think you're better than us. I ignore him. I look straight at my father. What is the proposal, Dad? Dad swallowed hard. He looked at Mom for support, then back to me. We need a loan, he said, his voice shaking. Or you could buy the house, buy out the mortgage. We could rent it back from you, just until Caleb gets back on his feet, just so we don't lose everything. There it was, the safety net. They wanted me to catch them, just like I always had before. They wanted me to fix the roof they had let rot. I looked around the room. I looked at the grease stains on the wall where Caleb had obviously fried something and never cleaned up. I looked at the ceiling where a new water stain was spreading in the corner. I remember sanding the floors until my fingers bled. I remember the smell of sawdust and hope. No, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Mom stopped crying instantly. She stared at me slack-jawed. What? No, I won't bail you out. I won't buy the house. But you have the money, Caleb said, his brow furrowed in confusion. We know you do. I do, I agreed. I could write a check right now and clear all of this debt. And I wouldn't even miss it. Hope flared in Dad's eyes. Then why? I stood up. I felt towering. Because 7 years ago, you sat in these chairs and told me I didn't need this house because I was capable. You told me Caleb needed it because he was weak. You bet everything you had on him. I gestured to Caleb, who was slouching in his chair, looking sullen and defeated. This is your return on investment, I said. You wanted him to have the house, he had it. And he ate it alive. If I bail you out now, I'm just resetting the clock. In 5 years, we'll be back at this table, and the debt will be double. We're your parents. Mom screamed, standing up, knocking her chair over. How can you be so cold? We'll be on the street. You won't be on the street, I said calmly. You have Social Security. You'll find a small apartment. It won't be nice, but it will be indoors. And me, Caleb snarled. What about me? I looked at my brother. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt sorry. You're 35, Caleb. You're capable. Figure it out. I walked toward the door. Sarah, Mom shrieked. If you walk out that door, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? Don't you dare come to my funeral. I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob. It was tarnished almost black. They hadn't polished it once. I didn't turn around. I already mourned you, Mom, I said softly. I mourned you 7 years ago in a gas station parking lot. I just came here tonight to see the grave. I opened the door and walked out into the night. The wind had died down. The rain had stopped. The silence of the lake was back, vast and indifferent. I got in my rental car and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. The house sold at auction in November. It went for pennies on the dollar to a developer who bulldozed it 3 days later. The damage was too extensive to fix. The sale price didn't cover the debts. My parents declared bankruptcy. They live in a 2-room basement apartment near the airport now. Dad works as a greeter at Walmart. Mom watches television. Caleb moved in with a new girlfriend for a while, got kicked out, and is now working night shifts at an Amazon fulfillment center. I don't talk to them. 2 weeks after dinner, I boarded a plane. I live in London now. I have a small flat in Kensington with high ceilings and a view of a rainy garden square. I have Mark, who moves with me and who loves that I am strong but never asks me to carry him. I don't do renovations anymore. I hire people for that. Sometimes, when a winter storm rolls in off the Atlantic and the rain hits the glass, I think about the lake house. I think about the smell of cedar and the heat of the fire. But then I took a sip of wine, a really good wine, one that no one else is drinking, and I felt the profound, quiet peace of having nothing left to lose. I let them win the argument. And because they won, they lost everything. It was the best investment I ever made. Sometimes the loudest revenge is just silence. Have you ever had to walk away from family to save yourself? I want to hear your story in the comments below. If you believe in karma, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. The next confession is even darker. Click the video on